Welcome to video 3. We're going to spend time answering the question, what information am I supposed to know when responding to an ethical dilemma in my organization? I invite you to take a moment and make a mental list or a written list of what information sources do you access when you've encountered an ethical dilemma in the past. I'm going to invite you to put that list aside for a moment, but don't put it too far away. We're going to come back to it. First, I would like to start with what are the 4 key foundational concepts that you need to know to understand ethical practices. These 4 foundational concepts span across multiple professions in the human services: social work, nursing, doctors, psychologists. These words, while I don't expect you to know how to pronounce them or, or say them, but I do want you to understand the concept behind them. Beneficence, number 1, do good. I think we can all agree that that's why we're here, to support people with disabilities and to do good. Concept 2 that I want you to understand, which I myself have a hard time pronouncing, non-malfeasance or non-maleficence. And that really is do no harm. So not only do we try to do good, it's also important that we balance out to not do harm. The third concept that is important is respect. So this means really honoring and showing regard for others' wishes, thoughts, experiences, and rights. The fourth concept, and this is the one that's really important when we work with people with disabilities, is autonomy, and that where the person has the right to self-determination, where they have a right to make choices for themselves, and our job is to support them in making those decisions. So let's talk about what a code of ethics is. A code of ethics is usually a written document for a profession that helps outline values and beliefs that are defining of that profession. They're often aspirational in that they're something that the profession strives for. So they're not necessarily thou shalls or thou shall nots. Instead, they're values such as respect for the person, responsible caring. They're values that we try to live our professional lives by and make decisions on. I offer that codes of ethics are aspirational, and at times there can be conflict within codes of ethics. So for example, there's so many examples, but a couple examples that come to mind when supporting people with disabilities is caring for the person. We are paid caregivers, and so we want the person to be well and to be healthy. And at the same time, we're asked to support individuals in making choices for themselves. And what do we do when the choices the individual is making may actually be harmful? Another type of conflict that can emerge from time to time is, what if the activity or behavior that somebody wants to do is actually harmful to those in society and public? So codes of ethics are fantastic. They help provide a set of values to guide our thinking and guide our decision making. But they're not necessarily Google Maps, step by step what to do. So now that we've talked a little bit about the foundational values of ethics and what a code of ethics is, I want to just bring us back to what other resources can help us in our decision making. Code of ethics are not just the only thing. So here we go. Number 1, does your agency have a code of ethics? Some do, some don't. Check with your accreditation body. Does CET or CARF have codes of ethics that they're expecting you to adhere to? ADWA has a code of ethics. Are you familiar with it? Have you read it? Number 2, code of conduct. So this is different than code of ethics. So remember I said code of ethics are a list and expression of values that define a profession. The code of conduct or the standards of practice are often that list of thou shalls and thou shall nots. It's the prescriptive behaviors that are expected. So for example, I think we're all in agreement. We know that we're not supposed to have sex with our clients or with our family members. I know it needs to be said again and again. Okay? Does your agency have a code of conduct for the staff to follow? If you were a student, you may have had one of those at the last university you attended. At an agency level, what are the policies and procedures that you're expected to follow related to ethics? Does your agency have policies related to ethics? When was the last time you read them? When was the last time they've been updated? I'm hoping those were the ones you had written on your list because they're really quite important. And those are the ones that would affect your behavior and decision making in the moment. I also want to draw attention and remind you of some of the larger resources. Larger is one word. I guess I'm thinking more systemic sources of information that will guide your thinking. So, for example, you're required to know some legislation. So for those of you that have taken some of your training, you may have already learned about the Protection for Persons in Care or Child Youth Family Enhancement Act. Ideally, you will have already received some training on privacy laws and how you protect client information. So legislation, while it may not feel like it affects your day-to-day work, I can guarantee you that it informs the policies and procedures that you're working in. The last source of information that you may wish to consider, but often this is responsibility of those higher up, such as executive directors, is really paying attention to what is the case law in the field right now. So for example, following case law that establishes things such as duty to accommodate persons with disabilities in housing or in workplaces. Some of you work in agencies where you may be supporting adults with disability apply for their own guardianship or appeal guardianship laws. So these are times when you actually want to be familiar with legislation as well as Canadian case law. I want to offer a gentle reminder that many of you have already covered this and may even teach this in foundations or possibly in your abuse response protocol training. So my intention here in this video is not to review the content in detail, but to highlight information that I think is valuable in your decision making. As a psychologist in the province of Alberta and a registered health professional, I cannot underline enough the importance of you really understanding your obligations around duty to report. Because you're employed in the field and as a citizen of Alberta, we do have mandatory reporting protocols when we feel somebody is at risk for abuse. So that you are to report if you have a reasonable suspicion of psychological, emotional, physical, financial, and even neglect. So please sure you know and are familiar with your agency's expectations as well as the laws surrounding your responsibility for duty to report. Next, I would like to transition to the ethical values that we find in codes of ethics supporting adults with disabilities in the field of human services. Here are the 4 common values and principles that are associated with the Code of Ethics for several professions here in Alberta, including psychology. Number 1, and I am going to say that again, number 1, because they're actually ordered in the value of importance. So first and foremost, number 1 is respecting the dignity of persons. What does that look like? That looks like respecting confidentiality, privacy, ensuring people have informed consent, vulnerabilities, etc. Number 2, and again I highlight, it comes after number 1, which is respect for the dignity and autonomy of persons. Number 2 is responsible caring. How might we show that in our work? Great question, let me tell you. Returning back to those key foundational values I talked about earlier, first and foremost, do no harm. Do good. Do a risk-benefit analysis. Make sure that the interventions that we're doing are actually of help to the individuals. That's our responsibility. That's how we show responsible caring. Number 3, integrity in relationships. So we're going to circle back to not only our relationships of the individuals we support and their family members, but our relationships with our colleagues, our relationships with our agency, our relationships with referral bodies, funders, doctors, community outreach folks in the community. So how are we presenting ourselves as professionals? So again, there's some descriptors here. Are we being accurate in our communications? Are we being honest and straightforward? Am I being straightforward in my communications with others? Sometimes as professionals, we end up using jargon and language that just doesn't always fit the audience who we're talking to. So how do we say things in the most straightforward and understandable way while also showing respect? The fourth one, and again, reminding you that this is the one that's least important, but can often be in conflict with the other values, is our responsibility to society. We are citizens, and we are expected to uphold the law, and so are the individuals that we support. If you've been in this field for any amount of time, you definitely know that there are times when an individual's rights can actually infringe on societies. And what does that look like in our practice? I'd like to go deeper with a few concepts, if that's okay with you. Number one, privacy. This concept is more than just closing the door when you go to the bathroom or hiding your PIN number. Privacy is really about what information you collect from individuals that you support and their family members. This is information that actually belongs to the client, okay? So things like that individual's name, their age, their medical information, including diagnosis, their behavioral information and family information. Things like sexuality or where they work. It's important that you, as somebody supporting this person, only asks for information that you actually need to be of service. And that you only provide information to others that is to be of service to them. So I don't want to get it confused quite yet. So here's how I think about privacy is really about what information am I collecting? Do I need to know that? Privacy is different than confidentiality. So privacy, again, is only collecting information that I need to know. Confidentiality is what do I do with that information once I have it? So remember to back up a little bit, and I talked about the larger picture, the legislation. This actually goes all the way up to international law. The United Nations has a convention on the rights of persons with disabilities that speaks to their right to confidentiality. So when you're working with confidentiality in your agency in Rimbey, Alberta, you're actually, by following confidentiality, you're adhering not only to local provincial laws, but you're actually following behaviors that everybody else in the world is expected to follow in regards to supporting individuals with disabilities. With the understanding that confidentiality is what you do with someone's private information, working in human services can be a little bit tricky. It's not uncommon for us to go home and need to debrief with a family or a loved one. And how much information should we be sharing about the folks we support with those that we love? How much information should we be sharing with coworkers? Coworkers can be a great source of information and consultation and support. And yet some of the stories that we share with them actually belong to the individuals we support and not to us. So I love that adage of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And I think that we really need to be thinking about that in terms of what happens to the individual I support is their story, and it actually belongs to them. And by retelling that story to colleagues, to my friends and family, even to that individual's family members, actually changes the story just by telling it. Being aware of talking in public. When we talk about clients, sometimes we'll try not to use their names or their age, but again, some of the communities that you work in can be very small. When you're in staff trainings, you may have an example that you want to share, and what identifying information can you change so that everybody else in the classroom doesn't recognize the person that you're talking about? Very, very tricky stuff. Confidentiality is one of the major complaints against most health professionals in the province of Alberta, psychologists included. We are so privileged to have information about those that we support. And with that privilege comes the responsibility of safeguarding it to the best of our abilities. So the best possible, keep your mouth shut. Only share the details that are most relevant and salient when talking with others, such as coworkers, including your family members, about those that you support. Keep you safe. The last piece I wanted to talk about with regards to confidentiality is two things. So one is leaving files unsecured. So just a quick note, I'm sure your agency has policies about it, but don't leave file folders in your vehicle, especially overnight. The standards for most health professionals is in a locked filing cabinet in a locked drawer. If it's an electronic file, you want it to be password and encrypted. So you are, again, because of the work that you do, you have privilege to someone's private information. I ask that you take the efforts to safeguard that information the same way you would want somebody to safeguard your own private information. With that being said, it's also the digital age. Take a moment and have a look and see what's on your phone. Do you have images of the folks you support on the phones? Where are those images backed up to? Who are you sharing those files with? Right? It's very common for school teachers to send pictures of students on a field trip back to their parents. And it's like, wow. And how do we know that teacher's phone is secure? An interesting, having worked again in the prison system, to think of folks with pictures of hundreds of children. So not only direct pictures of the folks that we support is considered private information, but also their artwork, right? So perhaps you go out with an individual and you're doing some painting and you take pictures of the artwork together. Is that your artwork to share? A great question I like to ask myself whenever I'm thinking about sharing information: who does this information belong to? And if it belongs to the individual that I'm supporting, then what pieces of that information am I obligated to share? So again, quickly, privacy is only asking for the information that you need to do your job well. Confidentiality is when you have access to somebody's private information, how do you safeguard? How do you take care of that information? The last concept I wanted to talk about just quickly is the concept of vulnerability. I can't imagine not speaking to this, but I know I won't be able to speak to it fully in this short video. However, I think it's really important to recognize that the individuals that we support do have some vulnerabilities. They have not had necessarily access to the same social opportunities or recreational leisure activities and even educational opportunities that a lot of their non-disabled peers have. They may not have been exposed to some basic life skills such as banking or driving or even vacationing out of province or out of country. So recognizing that the individuals we support for a variety of reasons may present with some vulnerabilities. The flip side of this is that we know by viewing people with disabilities actually creates the potential to keep them locked into a perpetual state of being vulnerable. For example, we know that when we told teachers in classrooms that the kids with blue eyes were smarter than the kids with brown eyes, grades showed that at the end of the year. So by viewing the people that we support as vulnerable, we actually consciously and perhaps unconsciously take away decisions and opportunities for them to take leadership in their own lives. So vulnerabilities is just one of those really delicate, not a right way, not a wrong way to think about it, but it's important to think about it. So let me see if I can state this another way. Recognizing that the folks that we support may have some vulnerabilities because of opportunities they did or didn't have in their lives is important. It would be foolish not to take those in considerations when considering for individuals able and capable of making decisions for themselves. However, it would also be foolish to assume that individuals are capable and able to make decisions when they haven't had some of the life experiences that might inform those decisions. So very, very murky water. I'm sure there's so much more to be said. I just offer that considering vulnerabilities is an important part of the ethical decision-making model, especially when we're talking about supporting adults with disabilities. Now that we've completed video 3, you're welcome to return to the web and spend some time reflecting on the discussion questions that have been provided for you for this video.